Hello, I'm Professor Rich and this is TYT History. Today I'm going to indulge myself and I'm going to talk about one of my favorite things in all the world, college football. This has been in the news a lot lately because of the horrible events revolving around Penn State, Jerry Sandusky, and Joe Paterno. And of course college football is right around the corner. It's going to start in just a few weeks here. And to be honest with you, I've had a really bad week and a half or so. And so I'm going to do what I want to do. And I'm going to tell you why I've never liked Joe Paterno. Now, I'm from Austin, Texas, and my parents met as students at the University of Texas. My brother and sister graduated from there, and I went to graduate school there. We're Longhorn fans in a big way. Now, as many Longhorn fans will tell you, if you ever bother to ask them, we don't like Joe Paterno much down here. And I know what you're thinking, oh, he beat you in a game somewhere down the road. Well, yeah, he did, but that's not why we don't like him. That's fine. We play games, and sometimes we win, sometimes we lose. I went to the I believe it was 97 Fiesta Bowl, where Penn State and Curtis Enos ran all over us. But that doesn't have anything to do with why I don't like Joe Paterno. You see, for us Longhorn fans, our problem with Joe Paterno isn't a game we lost, it's a game he refused to play. In 1969, Paterno was on his way to a second undefeated season with the Penn State Nittany Lions. I believe it was his fourth season as head coach of the football team. Number one all year long had been Ohio State, who was absolutely dominating, destroying everybody in their way. Numbers 2 and 3 were Texas and Arkansas, who were in the same conference and were going to play each other on the last Saturday of the season in a big showdown. And right behind them at number 4 was Penn State. Now, it would take Ohio State losing for anybody else to have a chance at the national championship. And then it would be either Texas or Penn State, or the winner of the Texas-Arkansas game or Penn State. Now, Texas beat Arkansas in what's called the Game of the Century, not because we're bragging that it's the greatest game in 100 years, but because that was the 100th anniversary of college football, and a lot of teams were wearing a logo with the 100 on them, and there was a lot of talk about that, and it was the best game of that season. Texas, who rarely ever threw the ball, ran the wishbone option. On a fourth down, a fourth and short, will shock everyone by throwing a long pass to a tight end who was rarely ever used as a receiver. A few plays later, Texas scores, and Darrell Royal, the head coach of Texas, will go for a 2-point conversion, not settling for a tie, taking the win, because Darrell Royal is a man and wanted to win a national championship, not stumble into one. Now, the way the bowl system worked at the time is that the winner of the Big Ten and the Pac-10 met in the Rose Bowl, and everybody assumed that Ohio State would be undefeated and go out to the Rose to play the winner of the Pac-10. Texas, as the winner of the Southwest Conference, would go to the Cotton Bowl. Penn State, who was an independent at the time, and had played a very weak schedule. They only had played one ranked team, West Virginia, who was 17th, whereas Texas and Ohio State had played fairly difficult schedules. Penn State needed to do something to impress and move up ahead of those two schools if they wanted to win a national championship. And they had the opportunity to do that. All Joe Paterno had to do was accept Texas's invitation to come play them in the Cotton Bowl. Two undefeated teams, and if Ohio State were to lose, the winner would become the national champion. And Ohio State did lose in their final regular season game, and Bo Schembechler, who would go on to be a legendary coach of Michigan, will beat Woody Hayes' Ohio State Buckeyes and shock the nation. What this meant was that if Texas won their bowl game, they would be the champion, presumably. And of course, if they had a chance to play Penn State, we would have a true national championship game, number 1 versus number 2. But Joe Paterno didn't come. He chose instead to go to the Orange Bowl to play Missouri, who was number 6 at the time out of the Big 8. He could have easily come down and played in the Cotton Bowl and won the national championship like a man. He didn't want to do that. He thought he could back into it. See, what Paterno was counting on is that Texas wouldn't be able to get a solid bowl opponent due to the fact that the Big Ten and the Pac-10 only allowed their champions to go play in bowls, and others schools being locked up due to tie-ins with conferences. He assumed that Texas would be stuck with a lower-ranked team. He could come in, have a bigger bowl win, and maybe leapfrog Texas and put himself into the national championship instead of playing it out on the field. Now, what happens next is legend here in Texas. DeLoss Dodds, the Texas athletic director, and the Cotton Bowl talked Notre Dame into playing in a bowl game. See, what you may not know is that Notre Dame wouldn't play in bowl games. They were above all of that. They were the great Notre Dame, and they didn't stoop to bowl games, exhibition games that they saw them as. But Texas talked him into coming down and playing in the Cotton Bowl and frustrating Joe Paterno's plans to try to steal a cheap national championship. Now, in 1970, these games were played in January of 1970, Joe Paterno explained it this way. He said, well, I had my players vote on whether or not to go to Dallas for the Cotton or Miami for the Orange, and they voted to go to the Orange. Now, this was before Ohio State lost, so before we knew it would have been a true national championship game. He said that one of the players' wives wanted to go to Miami because the weather was better and they liked to shop. So that's his explanation. All right, that's how you want to pick where you're going to go. Now, clearly, they could have discussed this again when they saw they had a chance to win a national championship when Ohio State lost, but according to Joe Paterno, they didn't do that. So here's what Joe Paterno does. He blames his players. Why didn't you go down and play Texas in the Cotton Bowl? Oh, it's my players' fault. Actually, it's even worse than he blames the players' wives. Now, Joe Paterno and the Nittany Lions will win the Orange Bowl that year. They'll beat Missouri. But the problem is Texas wins in the Cotton Bowl. Texas plays a great game against Notre Dame, converts another dramatic 4th down, scores a late touchdown, and wins the game, wins the national championship. Paterno will then blame Richard Nixon. Yeah, he blames Richard. I mean, he's already blamed the players' wives. Why stop there? Nixon had declared that Texas was the best team in the land after Ohio State had lost and Texas had beat Arkansas. But the reality was Texas had played a much tougher schedule. They had beaten the number 2 team in the country at the time and the number 10 team, Arkansas and Oklahoma, respectively, whereas Penn State had played almost nobody besides Missouri. It would have been insane to give Penn State the national championship. So what does Joe Paterno do? He goes on national TV and cries. Tears come out of this man's eyes. He cries because his poor players didn't get to be named national champions. But Joe, you could have gone and played. All you had to do was go beat Texas. But he didn't want to do that. I don't know if he was scared or if he just thought he was too clever, but that's not what he did. But none of that is really why I think most Texans don't like Joe Paterno, as sad as that is. Years later, if anybody can find him saying this before now, let me know. But as far as I can tell, it's not until the late 70s or even early 80s when Joe Paterno comes up with his current excuse on why he was too scared to go play Texas in the Cotton Bowl. He blames racism. He says, well, you know, John F. Kennedy had just been shot in Dallas and they wouldn't integrate their team, so we wouldn't play them. You know, making himself the hero here, as if he's doing something noble by refusing to go play the undefeated number 1 when you're the undefeated number 2. But there's 2 problems with that. First off, Kennedy had been shot. It's a terrible event, but that happened more than 6 years earlier than the game. It's not like they stopped playing teams from the South. But here's the bigger problem. Texas was integrated. The University of Texas football team had integrated in 1969. Now, they did this by accepting incoming freshmen, and incoming freshmen were ineligible to play varsity football in any program at the time. And so those players could not play varsity football at the University of Texas, but they were in the program. They played the next year in Texas' 1970 national championship team. Now, that's the kind of detail that anyone in 1969 would have known, because it was a big deal. But if you're trying 10 years later to make up a good reason on why you wouldn't go play when everybody knows you should have, that sounded pretty good. But it was nonsense. Of course, the way this stuff works, that those who turn Joe Paterno into a saint and a holy figure use this to burnish his legacy. Oh, Joe, he could have gone and played for the national championship, but he was too socially aware and too decent a human being to go play the racist Texas Longhorns. Now, Texas has a shameful history of racism and segregation. I totally get that. I'm not trying to justify that. I'm not proud of that. In 1963, Texas won a national championship with a team that wasn't integrated. I don't take pride in the fact that there were no black guys on that team. But in 1969, there were black guys on the team. They were on the freshman team, but they were on the team. So nice try, Joe. Think for a minute here about what Joe Paterno expects you to believe, how stupid he thinks you are. In 1970, he says he's not going to go to the Cotton Bowl, or he doesn't go to the Cotton Bowl, because his players had a vote and decided not to go, which presumes that they could have either chosen the Cotton Bowl or the Orange Bowl, and they chose the Orange Bowl. You have to assume that if they had chose the Cotton Bowl, Paterno would have gone. And then after getting tons of criticism for this and having more than 10 years to think of an excuse, he blames racism and the assassination of Kennedy in 1963. So, which is it? I know he's gone now, Paterno is, so he can't answer this question, but if you were so morally repulsed by the idea of going to play a bowl game in Dallas against an all-white Texas team, Why did you let your players vote? If they voted for the Cotton Bowl, were you going to call them all a bunch of racists and force them to go to the Orange Bowl? What was the point of that? Why come out and tell the media that? See, what happened is Paterno realized that history was going to portray him as a giant coward who refused to go play for the national championship. And so, in hindsight, years later, after seeing all these other people get all this credit for standing up for what was right back in the 60s, the Civil Rights Movement, which he didn't stand up for, he decided to retroactively insert himself into that story. Don't forget, Dean Smith, the head coach of North Carolina, had participated in sit-ins for black rights in North Carolina, which was even more racist than Central Pennsylvania. And I guess Joe Paterno liked stories like that and wanted to make himself part of it. So to me, the most reprehensible part of this whole story isn't that he didn't go play the game, and it's not that he blamed it on his players and their wives after deciding not to go there. It's that he decided to try to burnish his legacy and build up his reputation by pretending to be a fighter for civil rights when he was no such thing, at least not in this case. Maybe there's other examples. But in this case, he was merely a guy who decided he had a better chance to win the national championship by avoiding playing Texas than going to the game and playing them and trying to win it on the field. I think it's disgusting. I think Penn State fans, obviously they should be way more ashamed about the child rape scandal. But they should have been ashamed for this for years, for this guy trying to be a fake civil rights hero. Anyway, so if you meet a Texas Longhorn fan who knows the history of the Longhorns, and they tell you that they never really liked Joe Paterno that much to begin with, well, now you know why. I don't know if you cared, but I hope you learned something. And thanks for letting me ramble on about something that I love, Texas Longhorn football.